that will help. Okay, welcome.
We will be resuming in a minute, so if you could go back to your seat, very much appreciated.
Only three?
That's it for today. I have more in the hotel. Yeah.
When will yes, let me know, and I'll see what I can.
Welcome back, everyone. I guess there are still people who are enjoying their lunch, but since it's already time, we will resume to the closing. So our afternoon session is called Challenges to Applying Global Standards. Is one-size-fits-all approach really feasible? And our first presenter is Alistair McFarlane from Fisheries and Trade, who is a Fisheries and Trade consultant. So Alistair, please.
Good afternoon. And thank you to Professor Yagi and his colleagues for the opportunity to come and participate in this event, and also to participate in the last 3 days in the work that's been going on between GSSI and the team looking at the advancement of MEL in its version 2. What I want to do this afternoon is really make a number of observations, both about the origin of how we got to where we are with certification in the context of global conduct, and then also to talk about some of the challenges that exist for small-scale fisheries, which technically get described as data deficient. And while there's been comment made that this is a common problem in Asian fisheries, it's a common problem globally. There is not a fisheries administration in the world that doesn't have fisheries which meet a definition of small scale in a volume sense and meet a definition of small scale in a data sense. And these issues challenge everybody around the world. So, just in terms of the context, what we're talking about at the moment is where we are at the end, or at this stage of what is currently about a 25-year process, with its philosophical origins in the Reagan-Thatcher era, in the context of the rise of rights-based fishing. And Yagi-san talked about rights-based fishing this morning in a community rights-based, but rights-based fishing in a lot of the literature has been taken to be individual rights. And this has been part and parcel of the problem of trying to address the failure of fisheries management in a large-scale context due to what has been called the tragedy of the commons, where nobody has responsibility and everybody's at fault. And as we heard earlier, the significant concerns at the state of global fisheries in the early 1990s was a collapse of Canadian cod and a rising concern about the status of other large-scale fisheries, mostly in the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean. Now, at this time, of course, we had the environmental NGOs actively casting doubt on the status of fisheries management, to a point that they started to make brand owners, processors, supermarket operators, people in large-scale food service nervous about the capacity to continue to offer seafood to their customers. And they were looking for solutions. And in the absence of effective action by governments who are charged with the role of managing fisheries, then obviously at that point there was interest in a private sector coalition of interests to try to address and to put pressure on fisheries managers to manage. So, the FAO's Code of Conduct is a creature of its time. That's not to say that it's not relevant today, because it is. But the fundamental contexts of what constitutes well-managed fisheries, precautionary approach, the need for setting catch limits on the basis of a calculation of maximum sustainable yield against what may have been the original abundance of the stock, the need for target and limit reference points. These are clearly all still relevant today, but they're data demanding, and they are focused on managing the output of the fishery rather than managing the input of the fishery. Having said that, most fisheries in the world have significant input controls on gear, on vessel size, on days of fishing, and so on, in order to be able to manage the operations of the human beings who are fishing within the bounds of sustainability. They do not, however, in terms of the way the Code of Conduct has been constructed, they don't address well the institutional norms or performance measures for smaller scale fisheries managed at community level. And this challenge remains poorly addressed right up to the present, despite efforts to negotiate new international guidelines that further interpret the code. And as a comment, I think there has been a huge failed opportunity in the FAO's technical guideline for small-scale fisheries, that it did not endeavour to tackle this issue. Instead, it spent most of its time talking about the necessary issues around social conditions of fishing, the need for consultative engagement between those who are fishing and the communities that are reliant on fishing and fisheries managers. But really, it does not address issues of precaution and issues of trying to determine what is a well-managed fishery in the absence of the sort of technical detail that has been deemed to be appropriate in managing fisheries in other parts of the world. This is part and parcel of the concept social license, part and parcel of the concept of community, those who are purchasing fish, those who are trading in fish, being confident that where their fish is coming from and the way in which the fishery is being managed is being done appropriately, is being done well, is being done in line with acceptable norms of performance. And the concept of social license is really at the heart of the fear that was around 25 years ago and still continues to be flamed from time to time and is alive and well, you could say, in North American and European markets where seafood certification is being demanded. It is external independent verification by persons or persons who do not have a direct interest in the operation of the fishery, that the fishery is being well managed and that the people who are fishing in the fishery are performing in accordance with the regulatory requirements of the fishery. So the concept of certification in itself arises out of the concept of quality management and continuous improvement, which is a very Japanese concept. It was introduced to the world from the way in which Japan tackled the interest of the issues of quality control and manufacture after the Second World War in the industry reconstruction that was so successful in Japan at that time. It was taken on by the Deming Institute into the United States and has formed the basis of the process of quality management of planning, what you're going to do, doing what you're going to do, checking that what you have done is correct, and then acting on what you have learned to go back to the process again and plan what you're going to do to improve your performance. Plan, do, check, act. And if this process of planning, doing, and checking and acting is being externally validated by a third party that doesn't have an interest in what is going on, then you produce a body of information which can be provided to your customer that what you say you are going to do, you in fact do. Now, when fisheries are being managed by government agencies and private sector persons have concerns about the performance of governments, governments start getting nervous. Ministers start getting even more nervous because the possibility is that they may not hold their cabinet posts in the future if they are found to be in charge of failing departments. Public servants get concerned as well about futures as professionals in this area. Contrast that with food safety, where while there is a third-party certification arrangement in the food safety world, in the Global Food Safety Initiative, fundamentally food safety in a regulatory sense is managed by government agencies and inspection and control and other measures which put responsibility on food safety, on food producers. But nonetheless, the system relies on the role of government, and there is public confidence in the role of government to be delivering regimes which provide safe food in most places in the world. Possibly today China is the exception. In the fisheries world, where governments are clearly in the driving seat of responsibility for fisheries management, for government agencies to expose themselves to third-party verification by an independent organisation, this is a threatening activity. And it's one of the explanations why there was such, and there continues to be, such concerns among a number of government agencies to the emergence of third-party certifications in fisheries. Because while fisheries which have been managed in accordance with the norms that are clearly set out in the Code of Conduct, where you can measure maximum sustainable yield, you do have precaution, you do have limits and reference points and so on. And when those are absent due to the overwhelming difficulties that exist in small-scale fisheries, clearly those government agencies get exposed. So, they have major difficulties to provide the documented evidence provided. I just wanted to make a comment at this point about where certified fisheries are today after a process of the development of certification systems in a conceptual sense into being activated first off at the global level by the Marine Stewardship Council, closely followed by a rival organisation called Friends of the Sea. And just looking at those two certification systems, what do they actually represent right now? In a world where there are about 80 million tonnes of fish landed, the fisheries which are certified in terms of calculating landings represent about 4% of global landing. The market demand for those certified products is largely within North America and Northern Europe, particularly the Anglophone countries, the English-speaking countries, the German-related speaking countries. The Latin countries are somewhat less concerned about certification, and so you have a concentration of demand in North America and Western Europe. You have a concentration of fisheries which are being certified in the fisheries of North America and Western Europe, and Australia and New Zealand are overrepresented in that concentration as well, because they are part and parcel of the same cultural grouping. Within that range of fisheries which have been certified, however, by those two schemes, a small number are with landings over 100,000 tonnes. Alaska followed over 1 million tonnes, I think. The median of landings in certified fisheries is less than 6,000 tonnes. The mean is less than 10,000 tonnes. And that suggests a skew in the numbers of fisheries which are being certified towards smaller fisheries, which is kind of contrary to the received wisdom that these certification systems at a global level can only really address large fisheries, and small fisheries are being left out. The total number of fisheries which are being certified by those schemes include a majority which are smaller fisheries. How can that be explained? Well, there are a number of explanations. Summarised because the fisheries unit of certification is small. The numbers of vessels and persons and businesses which are seeking to be certified are but a small part of a much larger fishery. So the bit that is certified might only be a few hundred or a few thousand tonnes, but they may be part of much larger fisheries in terms of their total tonnage of production. Sometimes it is a result of several fisheries being certified with one industry association seeking a comprehensive coverage of fisheries, and they're looking at each of the parts, and they're needing separate certifications because of multi-species. But there is also within that a small group of smaller fisheries which are being funded by government agencies, by subsidy, by NGOs, and in the case of some smaller scale developing countries, which are part of that mix as well. So there is a mixed picture here, which is when you start to examine it, it starts to look a little confusing. But the myth that the certification systems that currently exist are unattainable would appear to be being busted by this evidence. But I don't think it necessarily is, because most of those fisheries that are being certified are still coming from within a cultural context of being managed with the instruments of fisheries management that are not being deployed in the local world fisheries. The FAO eco-labelling guidelines, when you examine them, are extraordinarily heavy in process. And that's one of the reasons why when GSSI did its exercise, it came up with so many indicators that needed to be identified and measured. And it is a daunting task for any certification system that is looking to be benchmarked by GSSI, because the elements that sit within the total frame of the wild capture eco-labelling guidelines, the certification guidelines for inland fisheries, which are very, very similar to the wild capture guidelines. They are process heavy, and they have very strict requirements for third-party structure. Standard owner must ensure full independence, transparency, and consultative structure as part of the certification system, not as necessarily as part of the management system of the fishery, but the certifications the standard owner has a lot of obligation in terms of the way in which it sets itself up and the way in which it needs to be able to demonstrate inclusiveness of all of the interests that might exist within the fishery, and that's a challenging task in itself. The process of independent certifiers being appointed needs to be done through an independent process with a separated independent body which the standard owner has no interest in to accredit certifiers. So again, this is best practice of a third party, but it is a challenge as far as the detail is concerned, and it really cannot be shortcut. Despite resolutions, it is problematic for dispute resolution is problematic for the standard owner, because in a situation where a certificate is being disputed in the process of it being established, the certifier can't arbitrate, can't be the arbitrator. The accrediting body generally doesn't want to be, and it gets left to the standard owner, and there's a potential conflict of interest that arises from that, in potentially the standard owner in the way in which it may deal with settling disputes could end up in a situation where it starts to be the certifier, where it starts to make modifications to the actions of the certifier. These need to be managed, and they've certainly been a challenge for some certification bodies. And finally, the eco-labelling guidelines themselves really deal well with certification. They absolutely deal well with certification. They do not deal well with the market aspect thereafter of the chain of custody of the product that might carry the certification logo, the product separation, management of that, and the GSSI process that has been addressed and has been addressed. I'm not going to go into any particular details on GSSI because I'm running out of time, and it's been well described in any case by Herman. What I wanted to really conclude with were some implications. That for those who are contemplating not only developing a standard which complies with the FAO's Code of Conduct and the eco-labelling guidelines, but is also looking to be benchmarked by GSSI, there are significant challenges and significant costs that arise. This is not a trivial exercise. It is not something that can be conducted in a short space of time. As Christian Thoraransson commented yesterday, you need to take your time. You need to go slowly because these things are complex and they are difficult, and you need to get it right. It also doesn't help if you try to overlay at the early stage with too many examples and too many complexities in the process of trying to establish the credentials of a standard in a real-world sense. But the things that you cannot avoid, and this is really my concluding comment, the things that you cannot avoid in the process of establishing a certification scheme that complies with the FAO's Code of Conduct and with these guidelines is that you must have the means of demonstrating that the fishery is being managed with precaution, that the fishery has got a capacity to establish what is a sustainable quantum of fish that can be taken from that fishery on a regular basis. In other words, what is the surplus that's available that will not impair the possibility of that fishery to continue to reproduce successfully. And you need to have measures that are pre-agreed and effective in the event that you get fluctuation. Because as we all know, fisheries are not stable. Your fishing effort may be stable, your fishing sector may be stable, nature is unstable. And you will get fluctuations, and you need to have a capacity to not react to those instabilities, but to be able to act when the signs of instability start to emerge, and act ahead of time. Those are significant elements. They're significant costs. One size does not fit all, but the model of precaution and the model of determining sustainability is a common problem to all fisheries, but there may well be different solutions for different fisheries.
Thank you, Alistair, for demystifying some of our common understanding that the certification system are not applicable to smaller scale fisheries. So I would like to take one or two questions from the floor. If you have questions, please raise your hand.
Thanks, Alistair. I found that really interesting. Just a really quick question. You mentioned that the FAO guidelines are not so good on chain of custody. Does the GSSI deal with that aspect of things any better? Or?
Yeah, the GSSI went to essentially the I think it was right, we went to the ISO standards. In other words, to identify what the best practice in the literature that was capable of not causing controversy in a situation where this would be seen perhaps to be stepping out of line with what was being addressed in the guidelines. It was perhaps also helped somewhat by the way in which the aquaculture guidelines have been crafted, as they came along rather later. I wasn't closely involved in that process, but I do know from experience in an earlier version with the FAO of trying to write a series of measurement criteria for not for undertaking the FAO, as you heard earlier, is not in a position to be able to make a judgment about certification schemes or the performance of member state governments in terms of fisheries management. But what it was keen to do around 2010, 2011 was to have a set of criteria which might be able to be used for assessing performance. And what we found when we did that deconstruction exercise was that it was actually quite hard using records in the ecological guidelines themselves to be able to be sure that they were effective in requiring separation of certified product from non-certified product and so on through the value chain.
If there is one more question.
I know we've discussed this over and over again, but I would just like your opinion and data deficiency for small-scale fisheries, because it seems to me that we can also do some work with social systems, and a lot of the objective evidence we look for is more anecdotal and more qualitative instead of quantitative. And so, is there any way that such qualitative data could be utilized to the advantage of small-scale fisheries?
What the guidelines say is that in the absence of the information that you might normally have for establishing, say, maximum sustainable yield, that you can use proxies, and within proxies, that would include other forms of measurements of performance and stability, and also the long as it can be verified. In other words, that traditional knowledge has in the past proven to be effective, and the measures that have been taken in previous times have evidence that they have been successful in what they've set out to do. It's difficult though. The word that springs to mind is ephemeral. It's a little bit sort of like clouds. It's hard to get your hands and sort of find what the core elements might be. The sort of things that we've been talking about over the last few days would be performance indicators when you've got a comprehensive landing scheme, for example, that you're able therefore to be able to properly measure catch against effort, catch per unit of effort, the length of time and the amount of gear that it might take to catch the same quantity of fish over a period of time. Measurements of the fish themselves, length, frequency, age, all of those indicators of how the stock is performing. And so that is the role of the scientists and the advisors to the management system. It may not necessarily be information that rests within the community, but in a system such as exists in Japan at least, with the community managed fisheries where you have external scientific advice and you have an oversight from the prefecture, I don't see that it's at all impossible to be able to bring together those indicators of performance into something which is effective as a proxy for establishing an MSY. I can tell you that from the experience that exists in New Zealand, where I come from, this problem plagues the inshore fisheries, the smaller scale inshore fisheries as well, because they lack comprehensive stock assessments and therefore have problems when it comes to against that certification. Okay?
Thank you, Alistair. So now I